Story 1. The Mirror Convoy. Jake Donnelly had been running freight across the Midwest for 17 years, and in all that time he'd learned to trust his instincts. At 42, with over 2 million miles on various rigs, he considered himself a professional who'd seen everything the road had to offer. He'd driven through blizzards that reduced visibility to nothing, navigated mountain passes in the dead of winter, and pushed through exhaustion that made his eyes feel like sandpaper. But nothing in his extensive experience prepared him for what happened on Interstate 80 through Nebraska on the night of March 14, 2019. The load was straightforward, industrial machinery parts heading from Omaha to Sacramento. Jake had picked up the trailer at 6 p.m., completed his pre-trip inspection under the sodium lights of the distribution center, and pulled out onto the highway just as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The weight was good, the balance was right, and his Kenworth W900 was running smooth as silk. Everything felt routine, which was exactly how Jake liked it. By 10 p.m., he was deep into Nebraska's endless plains, the kind of landscape that makes you feel like you're driving through an ocean of darkness punctuated only by your headlights. The CB radio crackled occasionally with distant trucker chatter, but mostly it was just white noise. Jake had his thermos of coffee in the cup holder, classic rock playing low on the stereo, and the monotonous rhythm of the road beneath his wheels. The digital clock on his dashboard read 10:47 p.m. when he first noticed the headlights behind him. At first, there was nothing unusual about them. Truckers traveled in informal convoys all the time. It was safer, more efficient, and it broke up the monotony of the long haul. The headlights maintained a steady distance about a quarter-mile back, moving at the same speed Jake was maintaining, a comfortable 70 miles per hour. He glanced at his mirrors, noted the lights, and thought nothing more of it. The road stretched ahead like a black ribbon, and the mile markers ticked by with metronomic regularity. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The headlights remained at the exact same distance, never gaining, never falling back. Jake shifted in his seat, adjusted his mirrors, and took a long sip of coffee. Something about the consistency bothered him, though he couldn't articulate why. Truckers usually varied their speed slightly, slowing for curves, accelerating on straightaways, but these lights remained perfectly constant, as if locked in position. He reached for his CB radio and keyed the mic. "Hey there, driver behind me on eastbound 80, you got your ears on?" His voice echoed slightly in the cab. He waited, listening to the static, nothing. He tried again. "Kenworth calling the truck on my 6, you reading me?" Still nothing but the hiss of empty frequencies. Jake frowned and checked his side mirror again. The headlights were still there, unwavering. He pressed down on the accelerator, bringing his speed up to 75. The lights maintained their distance perfectly. He slowed to 65. The lights matched him exactly, as if connected by an invisible tether. A cold feeling started to develop in his stomach, something primal that his rational mind tried to dismiss. Mile marker 285 passed, then 286. The darkness outside was absolute now, the kind of rural darkness where there are no farmhouses, no distant city glows, nothing but the vast, empty prairie on either side of the highway. Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. He told himself he was being ridiculous, that it was just another trucker heading east, maybe someone with a broken CB who couldn't respond. But 17 years of road experience had taught him to listen to his gut, and his gut was telling him something was wrong. At 11:23 p.m., Jake decided to test something. He flipped on his right turn signal and began merging toward the shoulder as if pulling over for a rest stop. He slowed gradually, his speed dropping to 50, then 40, then 30. The headlights behind him matched his deceleration perfectly, maintaining that exact same distance. Jake's heart rate increased. He canceled the maneuver and accelerated back up to highway speed, pulling back into the travel lane. The lights followed, never wavering, never changing position. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, reaching for his coffee with a hand that had developed a slight tremor. He tried the CB again, cycling through all the major channels. "Anyone out there on 80? Anyone at all?" Static answered him. He checked his phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual out here, but it added to the growing sense of isolation. The digital clock read 11:45 p.m. Jake had been watching those headlights for nearly an hour now, and they hadn't varied their position by even a few feet. He made a decision. At the next exit, he would pull off, let this guy pass, and put an end to this uncomfortable situation. Mile marker 298 appeared in his headlights, and he saw the sign for exit 300, a truck stop with fuel and food. Perfect, just 2 more miles. But as he approached exit 300, something impossible happened. The exit sign appeared in his headlights, and he began to slow down, preparing to take the ramp. The headlights behind him slowed in perfect synchronization. But as Jake's rig crossed the painted gore point where the exit lane split from the highway, the headlights didn't follow him onto the ramp. Instead, they remained on the highway, passing the exit. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him as he navigated the curving exit ramp, descending toward the truck stop below. The relief lasted exactly 4 seconds. As Jake's rig completed the curve of the exit ramp and he could see the truck stop ahead, a brightly lit island in the darkness with several trucks parked in neat rows, he glanced at his driver's side mirror. The headlights were behind him again, at the exact same distance as if they had never left. But that was impossible. Jake had watched them stay on the highway. There was no way they could have taken the exit and caught up to him without him seeing them on the ramp. His hands started shaking. He accelerated toward the truck stop, his engine roaring, and whipped his rig into a parking spot with less care than usual. He set the air brake, killed the engine, and sat there breathing hard, staring at his mirrors. The truck stop was well lit, with other trucks parked nearby, the restaurant glowing warmly. But he couldn't see the headlights anymore. They had vanished. Jake waited 5 minutes, his heart hammering, then climbed down from the cab. The night air was cold and he could see his breath. He walked around his truck, inspecting it, then looked out at the highway. Traffic was sparse. A car passed, then another truck a minute later. No one was pulled over. No one was waiting. He went into the truck stop, used the restroom, bought a fresh coffee, and tried to calm his nerves. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, asked if he was okay. He said he was fine, just tired. 20 minutes later, Jake climbed back into his cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. The digital clock read 12:31 a.m. He merged into the eastbound lane and settled into his seat, telling himself he had imagined the whole thing. That exhaustion and isolation had played tricks on his mind. The highway stretched ahead, empty and dark. At 12:47 a.m., the headlights appeared behind him again at the exact same distance. Jake's blood turned to ice. He immediately grabbed the CB radio. "This isn't funny. Whoever you are, back off." His voice was loud, almost panicked. No response. He tried his phone, still no signal. The headlights maintained their position, unwavering as they had before. Mile marker 312, then 313. He tried everything. He sped up to 85 miles per hour, the speed his rig could safely maintain. The lights matched him. He slowed to 55. They matched him. He turned on his hazard lights, hoping to signal distress to any passing driver, but the highway was empty except for him and whatever was following him. The darkness pressed in from all sides, and Jake realized with growing horror that he hadn't seen another vehicle in over 30 minutes. On I-80, one of the busiest freight corridors in America, that was impossible. At 1:15 a.m., Jake saw something that made his breath catch. In the distance, illuminated by his headlights, was a mile marker. 298. But that was impossible. He had passed mile marker 298 almost an hour ago, just before he took the exit to the truck stop. He had been driving east this entire time, watching the mile markers count up. 312, 313, 314. How could he be back at 298? The headlights behind him remained constant. Jake's mind reeled. He checked his compass. It showed he was heading east. But the mile markers were going backward now. 297. Then 296. He was traveling east but going west in terms of location. It defied all logic, all physical laws. "This isn't real," Jake said aloud, his voice trembling. "This can't be real." But the mile markers kept counting down. 295. 294. His hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The headlights behind him never changed position, and Jake realized with dawning horror that he hadn't seen the truck itself. In all this time, he had only seen the headlights in his mirrors. Whatever was back there, it was perfectly positioned so that his mirrors never revealed the actual vehicle, only the lights. At mile marker 285, Jake's radio suddenly crackled to life. A voice came through, and Jake recognized it immediately. It was his own voice. "Hey there, driver behind me on eastbound 80, you got your ears on?" his voice said from the CB speaker. It was the exact transmission he had made over an hour ago. Jake's stomach dropped. The transmission continued exactly as he remembered making it. "Kenworth calling the truck on my 6, you reading me?" Jake grabbed the CB mic with a shaking hand. "Who is this? What do you want?" His voice came out as a hoarse shout, but the radio only played back his own earlier transmissions as if he was hearing an echo from the past. Then another voice came through the CB, and this one Jake didn't recognize. It was distorted, wrong somehow, like a human voice played at the wrong speed. "Every road has a mirror," the voice said. "Every driver has a shadow. You've been driving the mirror road, Jake, and your shadow is right behind you." The transmission ended with a burst of static. Jake's eyes snapped to his mirror. The headlights were closer now, much closer, only about 100 feet back. They were growing larger, approaching fast, even though Jake's speedometer showed he was maintaining 70 miles per hour. In the dim glow of the lights, Jake finally saw the outline of the truck behind him. It was a Kenworth W900, identical to his own. The same model, the same configuration. And as the lights grew closer, Jake saw something that made his mind want to shut down completely. Through the windshield of the approaching truck, illuminated by the dashboard lights, he could see the driver's face. It was his own face, staring back at him with hollow eyes and no expression. Jake screamed and slammed his foot on the accelerator. His engine roared and the speedometer climbed. 80, 85, 90 miles per hour. The mirror truck stayed exactly the same distance behind him, matching his acceleration perfectly. The mile markers were a blur now, and Jake realized they were counting down faster. 270, 265, 260. He was traveling through space faster than he should be, the laws of physics bending around him. Ahead, in the distance, he saw lights. Exit 250, civilization. He aimed for it like a drowning man, reaching for shore, pushing his rig to its absolute limit. The engine screamed, and the whole truck shook. The exit approached, and Jake made his decision. At the last possible second, he cranked the wheel hard right, taking the exit at a speed that nearly toppled his trailer. Tires shrieked, and the truck tilted dangerously, but he held it together, fighting the wheel as he navigated the ramp. The mirror truck didn't follow him this time. In his side mirror, Jake saw it continue east on the highway. Those headlights finally pulling away and disappearing into the darkness. The exit ramp deposited him onto a state highway, and Jake immediately saw buildings, streetlights, signs of normal reality. He pulled into the first parking lot he found, a closed gas station, and sat there shaking violently for over an hour. When dawn came, Jake called his dispatcher and said he was quitting, effective immediately. He arranged for another driver to pick up the load. He never told them the real reason. Over the following weeks, he did extensive research on Interstate 80 and found scattered reports from other truckers over the years, stories of being followed by identical trucks, of mile markers that went backward, of seeing themselves driving behind themselves. The stories were usually dismissed as hallucinations caused by exhaustion or drugs. Jake never drove professionally again. He took a job at a warehouse, working days, and made sure he was home before sunset. He sold his personal truck and bought a small sedan. Even now, years later, he never drives at night if he can avoid it. And whenever he's in a car after dark and sees headlights in the rearview mirror that maintain the same distance for too long, his hands start to shake, and he has to pull over and wait for them to pass. Because Jake Donnelly learned something that night in Nebraska. Something he wishes he could forget. Every road has a mirror, every driver has a shadow, and some highways run parallel to reality, just close enough to brush against our world. And if you're not careful, if you drive at the wrong time in the wrong place, you might slip from one road to the other. And once you've driven the mirror road, a part of you stays there forever, matching speed, maintaining distance, following yourself through the dark. Story 2. The Station That Wasn't There. Marcus Webb had been hauling refrigerated loads across the southeast for 12 years, and in all that time he prided himself on knowing every truck stop, every rest area, and every reliable fuel station from Atlanta to Miami. At 38, he was methodical and careful, the kind of driver who maintained detailed logs and never took unnecessary risks. His route from Jacksonville to Atlanta on November 8, 2021 was one he had driven at least 100 times before. He knew every exit, every mile marker, every place where state troopers like to monitor speed. So when he saw a truck stop that shouldn't exist, his first reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion. The night had started normally. Marcus picked up his load, medical supplies that needed to maintain a specific temperature range, and pulled out of the Jacksonville distribution facility at 7:30 p.m. His refrigeration unit was running perfectly, the trailer holding steady at 36 degrees. The weather was clear, temperature in the low 60s, and traffic on Interstate 95 North was moderate. Marcus settled into his seat, adjusted his mirrors, and began the familiar drive, his GPS showing an estimated arrival time of 2:15 a.m. By 10 p.m., Marcus was crossing into Georgia, having made good time through the sparse evening traffic. He had consumed half his thermos of coffee, listened to a podcast about true crime, and was feeling alert and focused. His fuel gauge showed he had plenty of diesel to make it to his usual stop just outside Savannah, a large truck plaza where he always filled up and grabbed dinner. Everything was proceeding exactly according to his routine. At 10:43 p.m., Marcus's fuel gauge needle started dropping faster than it should. He frowned and tapped the glass, a habitual gesture even though he knew the gauge was digital and tapping did nothing. But the needle kept falling, faster now, moving from half tank to quarter tank in just a few minutes. Marcus checked his mirrors, looking for any sign of a fuel leak. Diesel spraying from his tanks would be visible in his running lights, but he saw nothing. Yet the gauge continued to plummet. "Damn it," Marcus muttered, calculating distances in his head. He was still about 40 miles from his usual fuel stop, and at the rate the gauge was dropping, he wouldn't make it. He started watching for exit signs, looking for any truck stop that could accommodate a big rig. The highway stretched through a rural area here, mostly pine forests on both sides, with exits few and far between. The fuel gauge hit the red zone. Marcus's chest tightened. Running out of diesel on the highway was not just inconvenient, it was dangerous and expensive. He pressed down slightly on the accelerator, trying to maximize his distance, knowing that momentum would carry him farther than stop-and-go traffic would. The engine continued to run smooth, showing no signs of actual fuel starvation, which made the plummeting gauge even more mystifying. At 11:02 p.m., Marcus saw something that made him exhale with relief. Ahead on the right side of the highway, maybe a mile distant, he saw lights. Bright lights, the kind associated with a commercial truck stop. And there was a sign, illuminated by spotlights. Bradley's Fuel Plaza, next right, all truck services. Marcus didn't remember any Bradley's Fuel Plaza on this stretch of highway, but right now he didn't care. He needed diesel. And there it was. The exit came up quickly and Marcus took it, his engine still running strong despite the fuel gauge needle now resting firmly on E. The exit ramp curved down and to the right, and as he descended, the truck stop came fully into view. It was massive, easily 20 fuel pumps under a large canopy, a sprawling parking lot that could accommodate 50 trucks, and a large main building with huge plate glass windows showing a brightly lit interior. Marcus saw several trucks already parked, which reassured him. This was a legitimate operation. He pulled up to one of the diesel pumps, set his air brake, and shut down the engine. The sudden silence was profound. Marcus sat for a moment, looking around. Something felt off, though he couldn't identify what. The truck stop was busy. He could see several other trucks parked, their running lights on. But it was very quiet. He couldn't hear the normal sounds of a truck stop. No idling engines, no voices, no hum of generators or refrigeration units. Marcus climbed down from his cab, his boots hitting the concrete with a solid thunk. The air smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, but wrong. Like ozone after a lightning strike, with an underlying sweetness he couldn't identify. He approached the fuel pump and pulled the diesel nozzle from its holder. The pump was old, older than he would expect at such a modern-looking facility. It was one of those mechanical pumps with physical rolling numbers instead of a digital display, the kind he remembered from when he first started trucking in the early 2000s. He swiped his company fuel card through the reader. The reader made a grinding noise, then displayed a message. "See attendant." Marcus sighed and looked toward the main building. Through the plate glass windows, he could see someone behind the counter, a figure in what looked like a uniform. He'd have to go inside to pay. As Marcus walked toward the building, he passed two other trucks parked at pumps. Both were older models, a mid-90s Freightliner and an early 2000s Peterbilt. Their paint was faded, their chrome dull, but both had their running lights on, suggesting the drivers were inside or sleeping in their cabs. Marcus noticed something odd. Both trucks had paper logbooks visible through their windows. Paper logbooks had been phased out years ago, replaced by electronic logging devices that were now mandatory. Seeing paper logs was like seeing a cassette tape player. Technically possible, but extremely unusual. The main entrance to the building was a glass door with a push bar. Marcus pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was bright, almost painfully so, lit by fluorescent tubes that hummed loudly. The floor was white linoleum tile, spotlessly clean. To his left was a small convenience store section with shelves of snacks and drinks. To his right was a counter with an ancient cash register, the mechanical kind with keys and a bell. Behind the counter stood a man in a gray uniform. The man was perhaps 60 years old with a thin face and dark eyes. He smiled at Marcus, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Evening," the man said. His voice was flat, inflectionless. "Need fuel?" "Yeah," Marcus said, approaching the counter. "Pump 3. Card reader said to see the attendant." The man nodded slowly. "We don't take cards," he said. "Cash only." Marcus felt a flutter of concern. Every truck stop took cards. It was industry standard. But he had some cash on him. Emergency money he kept for tolls and unexpected expenses. "How much for a fill-up?" "Depends on how much you need," the man said. Diesel's $1.27 a gallon. Marcus stared at him. $1.27? Diesel hadn't been that cheap since the 1990s. You mean $12.27, right? The man's smile didn't change. $1.27 per gallon, he repeated. Marcus's skin prickled. Something was very wrong here. He glanced around the store, really looking at it for the first time. The snack packages on the shelves were brands he recognized, but the packaging was old, designs from decades ago. A display of candy bars showed prices of 35 cents. A cooler held bottles of Coca-Cola with the old-style logo that hadn't been used since the late 1990s. "What year is it?" Marcus asked suddenly, his voice coming out more harshly than he intended. The man behind the counter tilted his head slightly like a bird examining a bug. "What year do you think it is?" he replied. Marcus backed away from the counter, his heart starting to pound. "I need to go," he said. "I'll fuel up somewhere else." "Can't do that," the man said, his voice still flat. "You came here. The station found you. Everyone who comes here needs to fuel up. That's the rule." "I don't know what kind of game this is," Marcus started, but the man interrupted him. "Look outside," the man said, pointing toward the plate glass windows. Marcus turned. Through the windows he could see his truck at Pump 3. He could see the other trucks parked nearby. But beyond the bright lights of the station there was only absolute darkness. Not the darkness of night, but a complete void, as if the universe ended at the edge of the parking lot. No highway, no forest, no stars. Just nothing. Marcus's mind reeled. He stumbled toward the door, pushed it open, and staggered outside. The concrete under his feet felt solid, real. But when he looked beyond the canopy of lights, he saw what the man had wanted him to see. The entrance ramp he had driven down was gone. In its place was just empty blackness, a void that seemed to swallow light. He ran toward his truck, his breath coming in gasps. He climbed into his cab and turned the key. The engine cranked but didn't start. He tried again. Nothing. The fuel gauge still read empty. Marcus grabbed his CB radio. "Mayday, mayday, anyone on this channel? I need help." Static answered him. He tried his cell phone. No signal. No service. Bars. The screen showed the time as 11:47 p.m., but the date read November 8th, 1997. A tapping sound made him jump. The man from the store was standing beside his truck looking up at him through the driver's side window. "You need fuel," the man said, his voice somehow audible through the closed window. "Everyone who comes here needs fuel. It's the only way to leave." Marcus sat frozen, his mind racing. He thought about the old trucks, the ancient prices, the impossible void beyond the parking lot. He thought about stories he had heard from other truckers over the years, urban legends about stations that appeared and disappeared, places that existed outside of normal time and space. He had always dismissed them as campfire tales, entertainment for bored drivers. But now, "What is this place?" Marcus shouted through the window. "A station," the man replied. "A stopping point, between where you were and where you're going. Some roads have these places. Most drivers pass them by, never see them, but some drivers, when they need fuel at just the right moment, when conditions are right, they find us, or we find them." "I want to leave," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I want to go back to the highway." "Then fuel up," the man said. "Fill your tanks, pay your $1.27 per gallon, and you can go." Marcus was shaking now. Every instinct screamed at him that something was deeply wrong, that accepting fuel from this place was accepting something terrible. But what choice did he have? His truck wouldn't start. The highway was gone. He was trapped in this bubble of light surrounded by nothingness. With trembling hands, Marcus reached for his wallet. He pulled out 3 $20 bills, all the cash he had. He climbed down from his cab, approached the pump, and began fueling his truck. The old mechanical pump churned slowly, the numbers rolling over with audible clicks. The diesel smelled normal, felt normal flowing through the nozzle. But Marcus noticed that no matter how long he fueled, the pump never showed more than 30 gallons, even though his tanks should hold over 200 gallons combined. When the pump clicked off, Marcus walked back to the building. His legs felt like rubber. The man stood behind the counter, waiting. Marcus placed the $60 on the counter. The man counted it slowly, then opened the ancient cash register with a loud ding. He made change and pushed it across the counter. Coins and old bills that Marcus had only seen in history books. "You can go now," the man said. "Follow the exit back to the highway. Don't stop. Don't look back." Marcus grabbed the change with numb fingers and walked out. He climbed into his truck, his whole body trembling. He turned the key, and this time the engine roared to life immediately. The fuel gauge showed full. Marcus put the truck in gear and began driving toward where he remembered the exit being. As he drove, the void of darkness ahead suddenly shimmered and he saw it, the entrance ramp appearing out of nothing, leading back up to the highway. He accelerated up the ramp, his heart hammering. In his mirrors, he watched the bright lights of Bradley's fuel plaza receding behind him. And then, just before he reached the highway, the lights vanished. One moment they were there, and the next there was only darkness and empty forest. Marcus merged onto Interstate 95, and suddenly everything was normal. He could see other vehicles, see the mile markers, see the stars above. His GPS showed 11:51 p.m. November 8th, 2021. Only 4 minutes had passed. Marcus drove straight to his usual fuel stop without stopping, his entire body shaking. When he arrived, he checked his fuel gauge. It showed 3/4 full, impossible since it had read empty when he pulled into Bradley's. He inspected his truck thoroughly, looking for any sign of what had happened. In the back pocket of his jeans, he found the change from the station. Coins dated 1995, 1996, bills that were the old design discontinued years ago. He completed his delivery to Atlanta but called his dispatcher the next day and took a week off. He drove back to the location where he had seen the fuel plaza, drove that stretch of highway in daylight. There was no exit there, no station. The highway ran through unbroken forest, and the GPS showed no truck stops for 40 miles in either direction. Marcus spoke to other truckers about it cautiously without revealing too much, and found that there were others who had similar stories. Stations that appeared when you needed them most, places that existed in the cracks of reality. Marcus still drives, still runs that route from Jacksonville to Atlanta, but he makes absolutely certain his fuel tanks are full before he starts, and he carries a spare 5-gallon diesel can in his truck. Because he knows that somewhere out there, existing in some fold of space and time, Bradley's fuel plaza is still operating, still waiting for the next driver who needs fuel at just the wrong moment. And the price of that fuel isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the knowledge that reality is thinner than we believe, that roads can lead to places that shouldn't exist, and that some transactions leave marks that never wash away. Marcus still has those old coins and bills kept in a locked box. He's never spent them, never shown them to anyone except his wife. They're his proof that what happened was real. His reminder to always maintain his fuel level and never trust a station that appears exactly when you need it most. Because some roads offer help when you're desperate, but the help comes with a price that you only understand after you've already paid it. Story 3. The Voice in the Static. Catherine "Cat" Ramirez had been driving long haul for 8 years, and the CB radio had been her constant companion through every mile. 31, she was one of the younger drivers on the major routes, running freight from Seattle to Chicago and back again on a regular schedule. She loved the CB culture, The camaraderie, the information sharing, the way truckers looked out for each other with warnings about speed traps and weather conditions. Her handle was Night Cat, because she preferred driving the overnight hours when traffic was lighter, and the roads belonged to the professionals. But what happened during her run on February 23, 2020, made her seriously reconsider ever using a CB radio again. The trip started at 9 p.m., pulling out of Seattle with a load of electronics heading east. Kat's Volvo VNL was her pride and joy. Well-maintained, comfortable, and equipped with a top-of-the-line CB setup that could pull in signals from miles away. She had invested in a good antenna and a quality radio because the CB was more than just a tool. It was her connection to the community of drivers who understood the unique challenges and loneliness of the road. By midnight, Kat was deep into Washington state, the highway cutting through mountain passes with steep grades and tight curves. Snow had been forecasted, but so far the roads were clear, just wet from earlier rain. The CB crackled with occasional traffic, drivers warning about black ice on westbound lanes, someone asking about the best truck stop in Spokane, the usual chatter. Kat had her radio tuned to Channel 19, the main trucker channel, and she listened with one ear while focusing on the challenging road ahead. At 12:47 a.m., as Kat navigated a particularly sharp curve, a voice came through the CB that made her grip the steering wheel tighter. It was a male voice, but there was something wrong with it. It had a quality that reminded Kat of old recordings, like the audio had been processed or filtered through multiple generations of tape. The voice was calling out to her specifically. "Night Cat, Night Cat, you got your ears on?" the voice said, using her handle. Kat's first thought was that it was another driver she had talked to before, someone who remembered her from previous trips. But she didn't recognize the voice, and something about its quality, that strange processed sound, made her hesitate before responding. She keyed her mic. "This is Night Cat, who's asking?" There was a long pause, filled only with the hiss of static. Then the voice came back. "You need to turn around, Night Cat. Don't go east, turn around and go back." Cat frowned. "Who is this? Do I know you?" Another pause. The static seemed to pulse like breathing. "You need to turn around," the voice repeated, and this time Kat could hear something underneath the words, a sound like wind or rushing water or voices talking all at once but too distant to understand. "Don't go to mile marker 167, turn around." A chill ran down Kat's spine. Mile marker 167 was still about 30 miles ahead, and she had no idea why this stranger was warning her about it. She keyed her mic again. "Listen, I don't know what your problem is, but I've got a schedule to keep. I'm not turning around." "You will die at mile marker 167, the voice said. And now Kat could hear clearly that there were multiple voices layered underneath the main voice, all speaking in unison but slightly out of sync, creating a chorus of sound. "Jackknife on black ice. Your truck will roll 3 times. You will be crushed. Turn around." Kat's hands were trembling. This had to be some kind of sick joke, some asshole driver trying to scare her. Women drivers sometimes faced harassment from insecure male drivers, and this felt like an escalation of that. She changed the channel on her CB to channel 17, hoping to escape the voice. For a few minutes, there was only normal CB chatter, 2 drivers discussing loads, someone singing badly to a country song. Then at 1:15 a.m., the voice came through again, somehow finding her on the new channel. "You can't ignore the warning, Night Cat. Mile marker 167, black ice on the curve. You need to slow down. You need to turn around." Kat slammed her hand on the CB power button, shutting the radio off completely. Silence filled the cab except for the rumble of her engine and the sound of her tires on wet pavement. Her heart was hammering. She told herself it was just a prank, that there was no way someone could know what would happen miles ahead, that this was someone's idea of entertainment. But the specificity of the warning, Mile marker 167, black ice, jackknife, was terrifying in its detail. She drove in silence, watching her GPS. Mile marker 140, then 145. The highway was quiet, with only occasional vehicles passing in the opposite direction. Kat hadn't seen another truck in either direction for over 20 minutes, which was unusual for I-90. The isolation added to her growing unease. At mile marker 155, she saw a sign. Steep grade ahead. Trucks use lower gear. Kat downshifted, reducing her speed as she approached the grade. The highway began to curve, winding through a mountain pass with steep rock walls on one side and a drop-off on the other. She kept her speed steady at 45 miles per hour, well below the posted 55 limit. The road was still wet but not icy. Her temperature gauge showed 38 degrees just above freezing. Mile marker 163 passed, then 164. Kat's hands ached from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that nothing was going to happen, that the voice was just a cruel prank designed to terrify her. But she couldn't shake the feeling of impending disaster. Mile marker 165, then 166. Ahead, Kat saw mile marker 167. The highway curved sharply to the right at that exact point. As she approached, driving carefully, Kat saw something on the road surface. It caught her headlights and seemed to shimmer. A patch of road that looked different from the wet pavement around it. Black ice. Her breath caught. Without thinking, she slowed even further, dropping to 30 miles per hour. Her truck entered the curve and she felt the wheels begin to lose traction. The black ice patch was larger than it had looked from a distance. Kat felt the familiar, terrible sensation of her trailer beginning to swing out. The beginning of a jackknife. Years of training and experience kicked in. She didn't hit the brakes, didn't overcorrect. Instead, she eased off the accelerator, turned the wheel slightly into the skid, and let the truck's momentum carry it through. For 5 seconds, that felt like 5 hours. Kat fought to maintain control, her truck sliding sideways on the ice. The wheels found traction on wet pavement beyond the ice patch. The trailer straightened out. Kat's truck completed the curve and emerged onto a straight section of highway, fully under control. She was shaking so hard she had to pull onto the shoulder, set her air brake, and just sit there, breathing hard. She had almost jackknifed, exactly where the voice had warned her. If she had been going her normal speed, if she hadn't been warned and prepared, if she hadn't slowed down, the accident would have happened exactly as the voice predicted. Kat sat on the shoulder for 10 minutes trying to calm down. She picked up her CB mic, her hand shaking, and turned the radio back on. Immediately, the voice was there as if it had been waiting for her. "You listened," the voice said, and this time it sounded different. Clearer, less processed, almost grateful. "Thank you for listening. So few people listen." "Who are you?" Kat asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know?" "I tried to warn myself," the voice said, and Kat's blood went cold. "I tried to go back and warn myself, but I couldn't reach that far. So I warn others. I try to save others. Sometimes they listen, usually they don't." Kat's mind reeled. "Warn yourself? I don't understand." "February 23rd, 2018, the voice said, a mile marker 167, black ice. I was driving too fast. I didn't see it until too late. My truck jackknifed, rolled 3 times. I didn't survive, but somehow I'm still here in the static, in the spaces between broadcasts. I can see things. I can see other drivers making the same mistakes. I try to warn them. You're the 3rd person who listened." Kat felt tears streaming down her face. "You're a ghost? You're broadcasting from beyond?" "I don't know what I am," the voice said, and Kat could hear the exhaustion and confusion in it. "I'm trapped in the CB frequencies. I can hear everyone, see everyone who uses these channels in this area. I watch them drive to their deaths and I try to warn them, but they think I'm joking or crazy. You slowed down, you listened, you survived. What's your name? Kat asked, though she wasn't sure why it mattered. Michael Torres, the voice said. My handle was Mountain Mike. I was 43, I had 2 kids. I was trying to get home for my daughter's birthday. The voice paused and Kat heard that chorus of underlying voices again, like static shaped into words. I can't leave. I'm stuck here watching drivers on this highway trying to save them. It's all I can do. Kat didn't know what to say. Every rational part of her brain insisted this was impossible, that ghosts couldn't broadcast on CB radios, that she was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But she had nearly died at mile marker 167 exactly as warned. The black ice had been real. The warning had saved her life. Thank you, Kat said finally. Thank you for warning me, Michael. Drive safe, Night Cat, the voice said, already beginning to fade back into the static. And warn others. Tell them to listen. Tell them the static isn't always empty. Sometimes it's trying to help. The voice faded completely, leaving only the normal hiss and crackle of the CB. Kat sat there on the shoulder, her engine idling, trying to process what had just happened. She pulled out her phone and searched for Michael Torres truck driver accident, February 2018, mile marker 167. After several searches, she found it, a brief news article from a Spokane newspaper. Trucker dies in single vehicle accident. Michael Torres, age 43, had died when his truck jackknifed on black ice and rolled off the highway at mile marker 167 on February 23, 2018. He left behind a wife and 2 children. Kat drove the rest of the night in silence, but she didn't turn off her CB. She listened to the static, to the normal chatter of other drivers, and sometimes, underneath it all, she thought she heard voices, warnings, directions, advice from people who weren't there anymore but were trying to help anyway. She completed her delivery to Chicago and made the return trip to Seattle without incident. Since that night, Kat has changed how she thinks about the CB radio. She listens more carefully to warnings, even ones that seem strange or unlikely. She drives more cautiously through areas where accidents are common. And she's told her story to other drivers, despite the skepticism and jokes. Because she knows what she heard, knows that Michael Torres saved her life from beyond the grave, using the only tool he still had access to, the CB frequencies he had used every day of his driving career. Kat still drives for a living, still uses the CB on every trip. But now, when she passes mile marker 167 on I-90, she slows down and says a quiet thank you to Mountain Mike. And sometimes, late at night, when the static seems heavier than usual, she'll hear a voice she recognizes offering warnings to other drivers. Watch the weather, slow down for curves. There's a vehicle stopped ahead. Kat doesn't know if the other drivers hear it, doesn't know if anyone else has been saved. But she knows that Michael Torres is still out there in the static, still trying to get home to his daughter's birthday, still trying to save other fathers and mothers and children from the accidents that stalk the highways. And Kat has made it her mission to listen, to believe, and to warn others. When the static speaks, when the CB offers warnings that seem too specific or too strange, don't dismiss them. Because sometimes the voices in the static aren't interference or pranks. They're the last desperate efforts of people who couldn't save themselves but are determined to save you. And if you don't listen, you might become another voice in the static, warning others who won't believe until it's too late. Story 4. The Hitchhiker Who Knew. Robert Big Rob Martinez had been hauling freight across the American West for 15 years, and he had one unbreakable rule. Never under any circumstances pick up hitchhikers. It was a safety issue, a liability issue, and a company policy violation all rolled into one. But on the night of July 17, 2022, on a desolate stretch of highway in Nevada, Big Rob broke his rule, and what followed convinced him that some people on the side of the road aren't looking for a ride. They're delivering a message. Rob was 47 years old, built like a linebacker with a graying beard and arms covered in tattoos from his Marine Corps days. He ran a regular route from Los Angeles to Denver, carrying automotive parts in his Peterbilt 579. The route took him through some of the loneliest stretches of highway in America, Nevada's empty deserts where towns were 100 miles apart and cell phone service was non-existent. Rob liked the solitude. It gave him time to think, to listen to audiobooks, to decompress from the chaos of the distribution centers. The night was clear and hot, the kind of July heat that radiated off the pavement even after sunset. Rob's air conditioning was working overtime as he cruised along Highway 93 at 70 miles per hour, his headlights cutting through the absolute darkness of the desert. It was 2:30 a.m., and Rob hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by any light pollution, and the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. At mile marker 87, Rob's headlights illuminated a figure standing on the shoulder of the highway. Rob's foot instinctively moved toward the brake pedal, but he caught himself. Hitchhiker. His rule was clear. He started to accelerate past, but as his headlights swept over the figure, Rob saw something that made him press the brake after all. The person on the shoulder was a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. But what caught Rob's attention was the expression on her face. She wasn't waving or trying to flag him down. She was standing perfectly still, looking directly at his approaching truck with an expression of profound sadness. Rob's truck rolled to a stop about 50 feet past the woman. He sat there, arguing with himself. Every instinct, every safety briefing, every company policy screamed at him to drive on. But something about the woman's expression, about the isolation of this place, about the vulnerability of someone stranded in the desert at night, overrode his caution. Rob set his air brake and climbed down from the cab. The woman walked toward him, her movements unhurried. As she came closer, Rob noticed several things that set off alarm bells in his head. Her clothes were clean. No dust, no sweat stains despite the desert heat. Her shoes were pristine white sneakers that looked brand new, and her skin had a pale quality, almost luminous in the harsh glare of his headlights. "Thank you for stopping," the woman said. Her voice was soft, musical, but there was something hollow about it, like an echo in an empty room. "Not many people stop anymore." "You shouldn't be out here alone," Rob said, his Marine training making him scan the area for threats, for accomplices, for any sign that this was a setup for robbery. But the desert was empty in all directions, just sand and scrub brush stretching to the horizon. "Where's your car? Are you broken down?" "I need to go to Denver," the woman said, not answering his questions. "I need to get to Denver by tomorrow morning. Can you take me?" Every warning light in Rob's brain was flashing red. "I don't pick up passengers," he said carefully. "It's against company policy. But I can call someone for you when I get to the next town." "There's no time," the woman interrupted. "I need to get to Denver. If I don't get there by morning, something terrible will happen. Please. You're my last chance." Rob hesitated. The woman's eyes were locked on his, and he saw real desperation there, real fear. Against his better judgment, against every rule he had lived by, Rob made a decision. "Okay," he said. "But you ride in the cab, and if you try anything weird, you're out on the side of the road, understood?" The woman nodded gratefully. "Thank you. You don't know what this means. You don't know what you're preventing." They climbed into the cab, Rob settling into the driver's seat and the woman sitting in the passenger seat. As Rob released the air brake and got the truck moving again, he glanced at his passenger. In the dim illumination of the dashboard lights, her features were delicate, almost ethereal. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. "What's your name?" Rob asked, trying to establish some normalcy to this bizarre situation. "Sarah," the woman said. "Sarah Mitchell." "I'm Rob, so what's the emergency in Denver? Family?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "My brother," she said finally. "He's going to make a terrible mistake tomorrow morning if I don't reach him. He doesn't know what he's about to do. I need to stop him." "What kind of mistake?" Rob asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "He's going to get in his car tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., Sarah said, her voice distant and strange. "He's going to drive to work like he does every day. But tomorrow, at the intersection of Colorado Boulevard and 6th Avenue, he's going to run a red light. He's going to be looking at his phone, checking a text message, and he's going to hit a school bus. 7 children will die, my brother will die, the bus driver will die unless I stop him." Rob's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "How do you know this? You can't possibly—" "I know because I've already lived through tomorrow," Sarah said, turning to look at him directly. "I've lived through this day 47 times, Rob. Each time I try something different. I try to call him, but he doesn't answer. I try to text him, but he ignores it. I try to take his car keys, but he has a spare. I've tried everything I can think of, and every time he gets in that car, looks at that phone, and runs that light. The only thing I haven't tried is being there in person, preventing him physically from leaving his house, but I can't get to Denver without help. I've tried walking, and I can't make it in time. I've tried other drivers, but you're the first person to stop in 17 tries." Rob felt ice forming in his stomach. "You're telling me you're living the same day over and over like that movie?" "It's not a movie," Sarah said quietly. "It's my existence now. I died 6 months ago, Rob. Car accident on this highway, actually. Mile marker 92, about 5 miles from where you picked me up. Drunk driver crossed the center line. I died instantly. But instead of moving on, I'm stuck. I'm trapped in this single day, July 17th, living it over and over, forced to watch my brother kill himself and those children. Unless I can stop it." Rob wanted to laugh, wanted to dismiss this as the ramblings of someone mentally ill or high on drugs. But something about the way Sarah spoke, the absolute certainty and exhaustion in her voice, prevented him from dismissing her. "If you're dead," Rob said slowly, "then what am I transporting? What are you? A ghost? An echo? I don't know," Sarah said. "I only know that I exist on this day, on this highway, trying to find someone who will take me to Denver. When I succeed, when I finally stop my brother, maybe I'll be able to rest. Or maybe I'll just disappear. I don't know anymore." They drove in silence for a while. Rob kept glancing at his passenger, looking for some sign that she was solid and real, but in the dim light of the cab, Sarah seemed to flicker slightly, as if she wasn't entirely there. Rob tried his CB radio, but it only produced static. He tried his cell phone, no signal, which was expected out here but felt more ominous under the circumstances. "Tell me about the accident," Rob said finally. "The one that killed you." Sarah's expression became even sadder. "July 17th, 2022. I was driving back to Denver from Las Vegas. I had been visiting friends. It was late at night, about 2:15 a.m. I was on this exact stretch of highway. The drunk driver's name was Thomas Palmer. He was coming from Ely, heading south. He crossed the center line at mile marker 92. He hit me head on. They said I died instantly. Thomas survived with minor injuries. He got 3 years in prison." Rob's blood went cold. "This is July 17th, he said quietly. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "And it's currently—" Rob checked his clock. 2:52 a.m. "Yes," Rob did the math. If Sarah had died at 2:15 a.m. at mile marker 92 and he had picked her up at 2:30 a.m. at mile marker 87, then the timeline was impossible. She should have already been dead before he ever saw her, unless time was working differently for her. unless she was somehow existing outside the normal flow of events. "Are you going to try to stop me from picking you up?" Rob asked, "and create a paradox?" "No," Sarah said. What happened to me already happened. I can't change it. I've tried. Every loop I'm here on the highway at the same time in the same place. I exist for about 6 hours, from midnight to 6 a.m. That's all the time I have to get to Denver, and Denver is still 300 miles away. We need to make it before the loop resets." Rob pressed down on the accelerator. His Peterbilt wasn't built for speed, but he could maintain 85 miles per hour on this flat highway. "We'll make it," he said with more confidence than he felt. They drove through the darkness, and Sarah began to talk. She told Rob about her life, her childhood in Colorado, her career as a teacher, her close relationship with her brother. She talked about the friends she had visited in Las Vegas, about the trivial reasons she had left later than planned, about the chain of small decisions that had placed her on Highway 93 at exactly the wrong moment to encounter Thomas Palmer's drunk driving. As she talked, Rob noticed something disturbing. Sarah was becoming less solid. In his peripheral vision, he could see through her to the passenger window. When she gestured with her hands, they left slight trails, like a time-lapse photograph. She was fading. "It happens when we get close to 6 a.m., Sarah explained, noticing his staring. "I start to fade. If I haven't reached Denver by then, I disappear and wake up back on the highway at mile marker 87 at 2:30 a.m., waiting for another driver who might stop." "We'll make it," Rob repeated and pushed his truck even harder. They crossed into Colorado just after 4 a.m. Rob was driving with a focus and intensity he usually reserved for emergency situations. He blew past every speed limit, his eyes constantly flicking between the road, the GPS showing their route to Denver, and his increasingly translucent passenger. Sarah had stopped talking now, sitting rigidly in her seat, her form flickering like a weak hologram. At 5:47 a.m., Rob's truck entered the outskirts of Denver. The sky was beginning to lighten with pre-dawn gray. Sarah gave him directions in a voice that was barely audible, and Rob followed them through empty streets to a residential neighborhood. They pulled up in front of a small house just as the dashboard clock clicked over to 5:59 a.m. "That's his house," Sarah said, her voice barely more than a whisper. She was almost invisible now, just a suggestion of a human form. "Thank you, Rob. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for stopping." "Will I see you again?" Rob asked, though he wasn't sure why he asked it. "I don't know," Sarah said. "If this works, if I can stop him, maybe I'll finally be free. Maybe I'll never have lived this day at all. Maybe you won't remember stopping for me." "I'll remember," Rob said firmly. Sarah smiled, a ghostly expression on a fading face. "You're a good man, Big Rob. Safe travels." She reached for the door handle and her hand passed through it. She tried again and this time managed to grasp it. She pushed the door open and climbed down from the cab. Rob watched as she walked toward the house, her form flickering with each step. She reached the front door just as the sun's first rays touched the horizon, and then she was gone, not fading but simply absent, as if she had never been there at all. Rob sat in his truck for a long moment, his heart pounding. He looked at the passenger seat. There was no depression in the cushion where Sarah had sat. No sign anyone had been there. He checked his GPS history. It showed his route from Nevada to Denver without stopping, as if he had never pulled over to pick up a hitchhiker. But Rob remembered everything. He remembered Sarah's story, her fear for her brother, her desperate need to prevent a tragedy. Rob pulled out his phone, which now had signal, and searched for Colorado Boulevard 6th Avenue accident, Denver. He found news articles from previous dates, but nothing from today. He set an alert on his phone for that intersection and waited. At 8:15 a.m., while Rob was at a truck stop having breakfast, his phone pinged. A breaking news alert. Traffic snarl at Colorado and 6th Avenue. Technical malfunction causes extended red light. No injuries. Rob clicked on the article. Apparently, a traffic light had malfunctioned at exactly 8 a.m., causing all directions to show red for over 5 minutes. Traffic had backed up, but there had been no accidents. A school bus had been stopped at the intersection during the malfunction, and several witnesses reported that a young woman had been standing in the middle of the intersection, seemingly preventing anyone from proceeding even before the light malfunctioned. By the time police arrived to direct traffic, the woman was gone. Rob stared at the article, tears streaming down his face. Sarah had done it. She had stopped her brother. And maybe, hopefully, she had finally found peace. Rob completed his delivery and made the return trip to Los Angeles, but he drove back through Nevada on a different route. He couldn't bring himself to travel Highway 93 again. Couldn't bear the thought of seeing Sarah standing at mile marker 87, trapped in an eternal loop. Several weeks later, he searched for Sarah Mitchell's name and found her obituary from 6 months prior, along with details of the accident that had killed her. Everything she had told him was true. Big Rob never picked up another hitchhiker after that night, but his reason changed. It wasn't about safety or company policy anymore. It was about respect for the impossible, for the desperate souls who might still be walking the highways trying to fix mistakes or prevent tragedies. Because Rob learned something that night in Nevada. Sometimes the people standing on the side of the road aren't looking for a ride to escape their problems. They're looking for a ride to solve them, to change the outcomes that have already happened, to save the people they couldn't save the first time. And if you're lucky enough, if you're kind enough to stop, you might be the one who helps them finally succeed, finally break the cycle, finally find the peace they've been searching for across countless repetitions of the same terrible day. Story 5. The facility that shouldn't exist. Derek Flynn had been driving refrigerated medical supplies across the country for 9 years, and he thought he knew every route, every shortcut, and every secure facility on the network. At 35, he held a high-level security clearance because his cargo sometimes included controlled substances, experimental medications, and sensitive biological materials. He was thorough, professional, and never asked questions about the contents of the containers he transported. But his run on September 9, 2021, forced him to ask questions that he wished he could unask. The pickup was unusual from the start. Derek received the assignment at 3:00 p.m. from his dispatcher, a priority medical transport from a facility in rural Montana to a research hospital in Boston. The delivery time was critical, and the pay was triple his normal rate. The dispatcher provided GPS coordinates rather than a street address, which was strange but not unprecedented for secure medical facilities. Derek programmed the coordinates into his truck's navigation system and began the drive from Billings. The coordinates led him off the interstate onto increasingly remote state highways, then onto county roads that were barely paved. By 8:00 p.m., Derek was driving through dense forest on a road that was more pothole than pavement, his headlights barely penetrating the thick canopy of trees. His GPS insisted he was on the correct route, but Derek hadn't seen another vehicle or any sign of civilization for over an hour. His phone had lost signal 30 miles back. At 8:47 p.m., Derek's headlights illuminated a gate. It was modern and imposing, 15 feet tall, constructed of heavy steel topped with razor wire. A small guardhouse stood beside it, and bright floodlights mounted on poles illuminated the area. A sign on the gate read, "Northern Biomedical Research Station, authorized personnel only." Derek pulled up to the gate and stopped. A man emerged from the guardhouse wearing a dark uniform that looked military but bore no insignia or badges. He approached Derek's window carrying a tablet. "Derek Flynn?" the man asked. "That's me," Derek confirmed. "I'm here to pick up a medical shipment." The man checked his tablet. "ID and security clearance verification." Derek handed over his driver's license and his medical transport security card. The man scanned both with the tablet, waited for verification, then handed them back. Proceed to loading dock 3. Follow the road. Do not deviate from the marked route. Do not stop. Do not exit your vehicle until you reach the loading dock. The gate began to roll open. Derek nodded his understanding and drove through. The road beyond the gate was smooth concrete, a dramatic change from the rutted track he had driven to get here. The road curved through the forest, and through the trees Derek caught glimpses of buildings. Large, modern structures that looked like they belonged at a major university or corporate campus, not in the middle of nowhere, Montana. Derek followed the road signs that directed him to loading dock 3. As he drove, he noticed several disturbing things. The entire facility was surrounded by a double fence line, both topped with razor wire. Every 50 yards stood another guard tower, each occupied by figures in the same dark, unmarked uniforms. The buildings he passed had no windows, just blank concrete walls and heavy steel doors. And there were no other vehicles anywhere. The parking lots he passed were completely empty. Loading dock 3 was a massive structure, a warehouse-style building with a large bay door that was already rolling open as Derek approached. Floodlights illuminated the dock, making it almost painful to look at after the darkness of the forest. Derek backed his refrigerated trailer up to the dock, following the gestures of 2 workers in hazmat suits who directed him into position. Once Derek had set his air brake and shut down his engine, one of the hazmat-suited workers approached his window. "Stay in your cab," a muffled voice said through the suit's mask. "We'll load the shipment. Do not exit your vehicle. Do not look into the cargo area. Do not ask questions. Estimated loading time is 30 minutes. Derek nodded, his unease growing. In his 9 years of medical transport, he had dealt with dangerous materials before: viruses, radioactive isotopes, experimental drugs. But he had never been told not to look at his own cargo. Through his side mirror, Derek watched as a team of hazmat-suited workers brought out several large white containers. They were cylindrical, about 4 feet tall and 2 feet in diameter, made of some kind of heavy plastic or composite material. Each container bore a bright orange biohazard symbol and a series of numbers stenciled in black. The loading took exactly 30 minutes. When the workers finished, they sealed Derek's trailer, and one of them brought him a manifest to sign. Derek glanced at the paperwork. The destination was confirmed as Boston, but the cargo description was just a string of numbers and letters that meant nothing to him. He signed. The loading dock door began to close, and Derek started his engine. He followed the route back to the main gate, still seeing no other vehicles, no signs of life beyond the guards in their towers. The entire facility had the feeling of a place that existed in secret, a place that wasn't on any maps. Derek reached the gate, and it opened automatically. He drove through and back onto the terrible road that would eventually lead him back to the interstate. Derek drove for 2 hours before his phone regained signal. When it did, it immediately began buzzing with notifications. Text messages from his dispatcher, voicemails from his company, emails flagged as urgent. Derek pulled into a rest area and listened to the messages. They were all variations of the same question. Where are you? Why haven't you checked in? What's taking so long? Derek called his dispatcher. I'm here, he said. I picked up the load from the Montana facility just like you told me. I'm heading east now. There was a long pause. Derek, we didn't send you to Montana. Your assignment was to pick up a load from a pharmaceutical distributor in Billings and take it to Boise. What are you talking about? Derek's stomach dropped. You sent me coordinates, a priority medical transport, triple pay. I sent you an address in Billings 3 hours ago. We've been trying to reach you. Your GPS shows you've been driving through the middle of nowhere. What's going on? Derek pulled up his assignment notification on his phone. The message showed a Billings address, a routine pharmaceutical delivery, standard pay. There was no mention of Montana coordinates or a priority medical transport. But Derek had the manifest from the facility, the paperwork he had signed. He pulled it from his document folder. The manifest was blank. The paper was there, but all the text, the cargo description, the destination, the signatures had vanished. The page was completely white. "I need to check my cargo," Derek said, his voice shaking. "Don't open the trailer," his dispatcher said immediately. "Whatever's going on, don't tamper with a sealed trailer. Drive to the nearest truck stop and wait for instructions." Derek drove to a large truck stop 20 miles away, pulled into a parking spot under bright lights and waited. His company sent a security team that arrived 3 hours later. They inspected his trailer seals, which were intact, then carefully opened the trailer doors. Derek watched from a distance as they examined the interior. The trailer was empty, completely empty. No white containers, no biohazard materials, nothing. The security team called Derek over. "There's nothing here," the lead security officer said. "Your trailer is empty. What cargo did you think you picked up?" Derek tried to explain about the facility, the coordinates, the hazmat-suited workers. The security team checked his GPS history. It showed him driving from Billings into the Montana wilderness, then driving in circles for several hours in an area where there were no roads according to any map, then driving back out. There was no facility at the coordinates Derek described. Over the following days, Derek was interviewed extensively by his company, by federal authorities, and eventually by 2 men who refused to identify which agency they worked for. They asked him detailed questions about the facility, about what he had seen, about the cargo containers. Derek told them everything, and they took notes but revealed nothing. When Derek asked what was going on, they simply said that he had stumbled into something he shouldn't have, and that for his own safety and the safety of his family, he should never speak about this experience again. Derek tried to find the facility on his own. He drove back to Montana, tried to locate the road he had taken, the gate he had entered. He found nothing. The GPS coordinates he had been given led to an empty stretch of forest with no road, no gate, no signs of any structure. He contacted other truckers on CB radio forums, asking if anyone had delivered to a facility matching his description. No one responded except a single driver who sent him a private message. "Stop asking. You weren't supposed to see that place. The ones who ask too many questions tend to have accidents. Forget it happened." Derek tried to forget, but it wasn't easy. Every medical transport he took after that, he worried about where he was really going and what he was really carrying. He started having nightmares about the white containers, about what might have been inside them. He researched secret government facilities, biological weapons research, experimental programs that officially didn't exist. He found hints and suggestions, but never anything concrete. 6 months after the Montana incident, Derek received an unmarked envelope in his mail. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Derek's truck parked at loading dock 3, hazmat-suited workers loading the white containers. In the background, visible through the open loading dock door, was something Derek hadn't seen that night. A large glass-walled chamber containing what looked like a human figure. But the proportions were wrong. The limbs too long, the shape distorted. Written on the back of the photograph in neat handwriting: "You transported patient 0. Best not to ask for where or for what. Forget you saw this." Derek burned the photograph, but the image stayed in his mind. He quit medical transport and switched to hauling standard freight, furniture, appliances, consumer goods. Nothing that required security clearance, nothing that involved coordinates instead of addresses, nothing that could lead him to another facility that didn't exist on any map. But Derek knows the truth now. a truth he can never speak aloud without sounding insane. There are places in this country that exist outside the normal world. Facilities that operate in secret, conducting research on things that aren't supposed to exist. And truckers like him are sometimes used to transport those things, to move them between the shadows without knowing what they're carrying. The men and women in the hazmat suits, the guards in unmarked uniforms, the facilities hidden in the wilderness. They're all part of a system that hides in plain sight, using the very infrastructure of normal commerce to move its secrets from one hidden location to another. Derek still drives, still moves freight across America's highways. But he never accepts an assignment that seems too good to be true, never follows GPS coordinates to remote locations, and never asks about cargo that comes with instructions not to look. Because he learned something in Montana that he can't unlearn. Ignorance isn't just bliss, it's survival. And some questions once asked can never be unasked. Some cargo once seen can never be unseen. And some facilities once entered leave marks on your soul that no amount of time or distance can erase. Story 6. The Road That Loops. Thomas Beckett had been a truck driver for 23 years, and he prided himself on his internal map of America's highways. At 51, with over 3 million miles logged, he rarely needed GPS for his regular routes. His knowledge of the road network was encyclopedic. He knew alternate routes, knew where construction would slow him down, knew which rest areas were safe and which were sketchy. So when he found himself on a stretch of highway he didn't recognize. On October 31, 2019, his first reaction wasn't fear, it was confusion. By the time fear set in, it was far too late. The run was routine. Furniture and appliances from Dallas to Nashville. Thomas had driven this route hundreds of times, always taking I-30 east to I-40, a straightforward trip that took about 12 hours with stops. He left Dallas at 6 p.m. on Halloween, planning to drive through the night and arrive in Nashville by early morning. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and his Freightliner Cascadia was running perfectly. By 10 p.m., Thomas was in Arkansas on I-40 making good time. The highway cut through rural areas, mostly farmland and small towns. Thomas had his cruise control set at 68 miles per hour, his stereo playing classic rock and a full thermos of coffee in his cup holder. He was in that comfortable zone that experienced truckers know. Alert but relaxed, his body and mind working on autopilot born of decades of experience. At 10:47 p.m., Thomas noticed something odd. He had just passed mile marker 247 and ahead he saw mile marker 248. Nothing unusual about that. But as he continued driving, the next marker he saw was also 248. Thomas frowned, wondering if he had misread the first one. He watched carefully. Mile marker 249 appeared. Then, impossibly, mile marker 249 appeared again about a mile later. Thomas's confusion deepened. He checked his GPS, which showed him on I-40 heading east exactly where he should be. But the mile markers were repeating. He saw 250, then 250 again, then 251, then 251 again. Every mile marker was appearing twice, as if the highway was stuttering, repeating itself. "What the hell?" Thomas muttered, turning down his stereo to focus. He began paying close attention to the landscape around him. The highway looked normal. 4 lanes divided, gentle curves, trees and fields on both sides. But Thomas started noticing something disturbing. Every few miles he would pass the same landmark twice. A distinctive water tower shaped like a peach. He passed it once, and then 5 miles later he passed it again. An old abandoned gas station with a collapsed roof. He saw it, watched it recede in his mirrors, and then 10 miles later saw it ahead of him again. Thomas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't possible. He couldn't be driving in a loop. His GPS showed him making forward progress. The mile markers were counting up and the highway never turned back on itself. But the landmarks kept repeating. A billboard advertising a barbecue restaurant. He saw it 3 times over the next 20 miles. A distinctive bridge crossing over a river. He crossed it twice. At 11:35 p.m., Thomas decided to test something. He set his trip odometer to 0 and watched carefully. He identified a landmark, a distinctive barn painted red with a faded mail pouch tobacco advertisement on its side. He noted the exact moment he passed it. He drove for exactly 30 miles according to his odometer, watching the mile markers count up. 267, 268, 269, all the way to 297. And then exactly 30 miles from where he had first seen it, the red barn appeared again in his headlights, identical in every detail. Thomas pulled onto the shoulder, his heart pounding. He grabbed his CB radio. Anyone on I-40 eastbound in Arkansas, this is Thomas Beckett. Anyone out there? Static answered him. He tried multiple channels. Nothing. He checked his cell, phone. No signal. He tried his truck's satellite communication system offline. Thomas sat there for 5 minutes trying to make sense of what was happening. The highway stretched ahead and behind, looking perfectly normal in his headlights and taillights. Occasional cars passed, driving normally, seemingly unaffected by whatever was happening to him. Thomas decided to continue driving, hoping that whatever anomaly he had encountered would resolve itself. He drove for another hour, carefully tracking landmarks and mile markers. The pattern became undeniable. Every 30 miles, the landscape repeated. He would pass the same sequence of landmarks: the Peach Water Tower, the abandoned gas station, the distinctive bridge, the red barn, in the exact same order, at the exact same intervals. His GPS insisted he was making progress, showing him approaching Little Rock. But the landscape was trapped in a loop, cycling through the same 30-mile segment again and again. At 12:47 a.m., Thomas saw something that made his blood run cold. Ahead on the highway, illuminated by his headlights, was a truck. Not unusual. Trucks shared the highways constantly. But as Thomas gained on the truck, he recognized it. It was a Freightliner Cascadia, identical to his own, with the same color scheme, the same company logos. Thomas accelerated slightly, pulling into the passing lane to get a better look. As he came alongside the truck, Thomas looked over at the driver. He saw himself. The driver of the other truck was Thomas Beckett. Same face, same build, same gray beard, wearing the same clothes Thomas was wearing. The other Thomas turned his head and looked back, and their eyes met. The expression on the other Thomas's face was one of pure terror. Thomas slammed on his brakes, his truck shuddering as the air brakes engaged. The other truck continued ahead, pulling away, and Thomas watched in horror as his own taillights disappeared around a curve. Thomas sat there on the highway, shaking violently. Cars continued to pass him, their drivers apparently oblivious to the impossibility that had just occurred. After several minutes, Thomas forced himself to start driving again. He had to understand what was happening, had to find a way out of this loop. As he drove, he started noticing more details that he had missed before. The cars that passed him, he was starting to recognize them. A white Honda Accord with a dented rear bumper driving the loop. A blue Chevy pickup with a Confederate flag sticker passing him every 30 miles. The same vehicles trapped in the same cycle. Thomas tried exiting the highway. He took an exit ramp for a town called Riverside, following the ramp down to a stoplight. But when the light turned green and he proceeded into the town, the road curved and he found himself back on the highway entrance ramp, merging back onto I-40 at the exact same point he had exited. He tried another exit with the same result. The road doubled, back on itself impossibly, depositing him back on the highway. At 2:15 a.m., Thomas saw the other truck again. This time, instead of avoiding it, he matched speed with it. He drove alongside his doppelganger truck for over a mile, and both versions of Thomas looked at each other. The other Thomas was crying, his face twisted in despair. He was mouthing words that Thomas couldn't hear, but Thomas could read his lips. How long? How long have I been here? Thomas felt a wave of existential terror wash over him. The other Thomas wasn't a copy or an illusion. He was another version of Thomas, another trucker who had entered this loop at some other time and had been trapped here. And if that other Thomas was still here, still driving this endless loop, how long had he been trapped? Days? Weeks? Years? Thomas grabbed a marker from his glove box and wrote on his windshield, OCT 31 2019. He held it up for the other Thomas to see. The other Thomas looked at it, then frantically grabbed his own marker. He wrote on his windshield and held it up. The date read, OCT 31 2017. 2 years. The other Thomas had been trapped in this loop for 2 years, driving the same 30 miles over and over, unable to escape. Thomas felt his sanity beginning to crack. He accelerated, pulling away from the other truck, unable to look at that expression of hopeless despair any longer. Over the next several hours, Thomas tried everything. He tried driving backward, but the highway wouldn't allow it. The moment he put his truck in reverse, the steering locked and the engine died. He tried stopping and waiting, hoping the loop would break. But after sitting still for 30 minutes, he saw his own truck approaching from behind. Another version of himself, trapped in another iteration. He tried ramming the guardrail, hoping to force himself off the highway, but the guardrail was impossibly strong, unyielding, and his truck bounced off it without leaving a mark. As dawn approached, Thomas was no longer alone on the loop. He could now see multiple versions of his truck, all driving the same circuit. He counted at least 7 other iterations of himself, all trapped in the same nightmare. Some of the other trucks showed damage, dented bumpers, cracked windshields, broken mirrors, evidence of their drivers' attempts to escape. At 6:47 a.m., as the sun rose over the impossible highway, Thomas noticed something new. Ahead, shimmering in the morning light, was a structure he hadn't seen during the night, a toll booth standing incongruously in the middle of the highway. There had been no toll booths on this stretch of highway when Thomas entered it. But there it was, and Thomas saw no way to avoid it. He slowed his truck as he approached. The toll booth was old-fashioned, a small building with a single window. A figure stood behind the window. A woman, elderly, with white hair and dark eyes. Thomas pulled up alongside the booth and rolled down his window. "Toll," the woman said, her voice raspy and ancient. "I don't have cash," Thomas said. "I use electronic toll passes." "Not that kind of toll," the woman interrupted. "The toll is a choice. You can keep driving this loop forever, joining the others who couldn't decide. Or you can pay the toll and leave." "What's the toll?" Thomas asked desperately. "I'll pay anything. I'll give you anything." The woman's dark eyes bored into him. "The toll is memory. You can leave, but you have to leave behind the memory of someone you love. The loop will take it. You'll forget they exist. They'll still exist in the real world, but you'll have no memory of them. No knowledge that they were ever part of your life. Choose someone, and you can leave." Thomas's mind reeled. He had a wife of 28 years, 2 adult children, 3 grandchildren. The thought of forgetting any of them was horrifying. But the thought of driving this loop forever, of becoming like that other Thomas trapped for 2 years, was even worse. He thought of his wife Sarah, his daughter Jessica, his son Michael. He thought of his grandchildren whose names he had taught them to say. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Thomas asked. "How do I know paying this toll will really free me?" "You don't," the woman said simply. "You have to choose to believe or choose to drive. Those are your only options." Thomas sat there, tears streaming down his face. He thought about his family, about the life waiting for him outside this impossible loop. He thought about growing old, driving the same 30 miles forever, watching himself in multiple iterations, slowly losing his mind. He made his choice. "My brother," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "I choose my brother David." Thomas had a younger brother, David, whom he hadn't seen in 15 years. They had had a falling out over their father's estate and never reconciled. Thomas barely thought about David anymore, the pain of their estrangement having dulled over the years. If he had to lose someone from his memory, at least David was someone already halfway lost. The woman nodded. "Done," she said simply. She raised a bar that Thomas hadn't noticed, allowing him to pass through the toll booth. "Drive straight. Don't look back." Thomas drove forward, his vision blurred with tears. The highway ahead seemed to shimmer, and suddenly he was passing a sign. "Welcome to Tennessee." His GPS showed him on I-40, 50 miles west of Nashville, exactly where he should be based on the time and distance he had driven. The sun was rising, and everything looked normal. Thomas continued to Nashville, made his delivery, and drove back to Dallas in a daze. Over the following days, he tried to process what had happened. He checked his logs, his GPS history, and found something disturbing. According to all his records, he had driven straight from Dallas to Nashville with no unusual delays or detours. The 8 hours he had spent trapped in the loop didn't appear anywhere in his official records. It was as if they had never happened. But Thomas remembered every detail. He remembered the repeating landmarks, the multiple versions of himself, the toll booth, and the terrible choice. He tried to talk about it with other truckers, but they dismissed it as a hallucination or sleep deprivation. Only one old-timer, a driver with 30 years of experience, gave him a knowing look and said, "You paid the toll, didn't you? Smart man. Some loops you can't escape without leaving something behind." Thomas went home to his wife Sarah, embraced her tightly, and was grateful beyond words that he remembered her. He called his daughter Jessica and his son Michael just to hear their voices. He made plans to visit his grandchildren. But when Sarah mentioned Thomas's brother David, something about a mutual acquaintance asking about the family, Thomas felt a strange blankness. He couldn't remember having a brother named David. Sarah showed him old photos, pictures of 2 boys growing up together, and Thomas recognized himself in the photos but not the other boy. Sarah told him about the falling out, about David moving to Oregon, about the years of silence. Thomas listened and felt nothing, no recognition, no memory, no sense of loss for something that had been taken from him. Thomas still drives long-haul routes, still crosses Arkansas on I-40 on his way to Nashville. But he always drives that stretch during the day now, never at night, and he pays careful attention to the mile markers. If he ever sees them repeating, he knows he'll take the first exit and find another route, even if it adds hours to his journey. Because Thomas learned something on that Halloween night, something that haunts him whenever he passes the 247th mile marker. Some highways have loops built into them, trap doors that open at certain times under certain conditions, catching unlucky drivers and holding them in cycles that repeat endlessly. And the only way out is to pay a toll that leaves you permanently diminished, missing a piece of yourself that you never even realize is gone until someone mentions a name that means nothing to you, shows you a photograph of a stranger who has your eyes, or tells you stories about a relationship you can't remember ever having. The loop takes its payment and you drive on, free but forever incomplete, carrying an absence you can't articulate and a loss you can't mourn because you no longer remember what you lost.